Hello, and welcome to a presentation about the academic considerations when counseling gifted students. My name is Arhemia Fadai, and although the topic about recognizing gifted children can be readily researched, I find that in the field of counseling, there is a great deal of opportunity to expound upon when it comes to counseling the gifted student. Specialized school counseling services are recognized by many experts as essential to the academic achievement of the gifted child. Unfortunately, school counselors today may not have adequate knowledge or training to be able to provide said services to these students based on their own personal preconceived ideas, attitudes, and biases and simple ignorance of the needs of this select population. While there is still room for growth and development on the topic, more current publications do include some practical considerations and suggested guidelines for their unique counseling needs. And most recently, special conferences, seminars, and workshops designed to help counselors, parents, and other support services personnel better meet the needs of the gifted have been offered by colleges and universities and professional organizations such as the National Association for Gifted Children, or the NAGC. Withstanding that, the vast majority of school counselors today are still unaware of the unique counseling needs that these students require. Therefore, they are unable to service them adequately. Because school counselors are in a position to form trusting therapeutic relationships with all the students that they counsel, the gifted student should be provided nurturing and support via group counseling assistance covering a myriad of topics. They seem to work better when they are counseled in a group. But I digress. Let us now identify 5 traits that have been recognized as the 5 identifying characteristics of the gifted child. Who are the gifted? How are they recognized? What are some of the commonly identified traits that are considered to be predominant within gifted individuals? According to Coliangelo and Wood, in their research conducted in 2015, they were able to recognize and identify 5 characteristics for what they considered to be predominant traits within gifted individuals. Number 1 is divergent thinking. Innovative, creative, out-of-the-norm thoughts. These are people who just simply don't think the way others think. They see more than what the average person sees. They figure out ways to conduct research and things of that nature. 2, they're easily excitable. They're high energy with the extreme ability to concentrate and focus, which is not common amongst the average person. They're extremely sensitive. They have a great deal of empathy and identification with others. They can always put themselves in someone else's shoes, and sometimes they may even take on the feelings that others may have as well. Entelechy, which is the Greek word for having a goal. Entelechy is having inner strength and the self-motivation to get things accomplished. They have a great deal of perceptiveness, insight and intuition, the ability to see multifaceted situations simultaneously and concurrently. These are the 5 traits that Colangelo and Wood identified as predominant within most gifted individuals. The gifted student assortment. There are 6 identifiers that I've put up here that identify the type of gifted student. There's the successful student. This is the one that 90% of the students who are identified as gifted fall within. They're recognized by their schools, programs, they're recognized by their teachers, and oftentimes they're recognized by their own parents as being above the norm. 90% of these students are identified through this way. Then you have the challenging student. This is the divergent student who is rarely identified in the school setting because they tend to blend in with the rest of their classmates. Then you have the underground student, that in order to better fit in with their peers, this student masks their true intellect. Oftentimes you'll find them to be students who may be disruptive in class, students who may intentionally get wrong answers, or they may even be the student who gets the great answers and hides their grades because they don't want everyone to recognize how intelligent they are. Then you have the dropout student. Bored, rejected, and angry about not having their needs met in school. This student is often an at-risk student who tends to cover up their true intellect by indulging in behaviors that are unsavory and behaviors that will have them actually dismissed or expelled from school. Then you have the twice exceptional learner. This is the student that on one hand is gifted and their strengths are so high that they mask their learning disabilities. So they're gifted and intelligent on one hand, but they have a learning disability. They're extremely intelligent, but they can't seem to organize themselves. And they get easily frustrated. And they make silly mistakes when it comes down to their classwork because they have such a high-ordered thinking. Then you have the autonomous learner. This is the person that learns on their own. They may have come into the school already knowing a great deal of the curriculum, and they're the ones that are able to think on their own and come up with new ideas and thoughts. Think of the student that has the ability to learn how to build computers by taking them apart and just studying the mechanisms. Most of these autonomous learners have photographic memories. They're able to store a great deal of information. Also, these gifted students tend to ignore details, turn in messy work, or like some of the dropout or the underground students, they reject authority and can also be non-conforming. There are a great many individuals within the school system that hold on to misguided assumptions and perpetuate stereotypes onto the gifted student. It's critical that these counselors are aware of these myths. One of the myths is that all gifted students are high achievers. They all seem to be able to get it right in life. That couldn't be further from the truth. They think that these students don't need any help, that they're really gifted and can manage on their own, that they're all one homogeneous group. Another stereotype is that the world is full of opportunities for them more than others. They don't have to work hard because they get it. Life should come easy to them because they're so intellectually astute. Another stereotype and misguided assumption is that all gifted students are inept and they're nerds. That couldn't be further from the truth. There are a great deal of people who are gifted, have been recognized as being a gifted student, that are able to form social relationships with peers. And they aren't nerds, for whatever a nerd is. They also believe that gifted students make everyone else around them smarter by osmosis. Put a gifted child in the class, everybody else in the class should be smart. They'll all rise to the occasion. That couldn't be further from the truth at all. That is, in fact, a great myth. They feel that the primary value of the gifted student lies in his or her brain power and brain power only. What else can they contribute to the world aside from their intellect? That's an awful way to think. The students that are gifted are easy to raise and have great self-control in the classroom. In the previous slide, I discussed the challenging student and I discussed the dropout. Those are students that are completely bored with the curriculum because they've already mastered it in their own right. So they act out to get attention. They act out or they engage in at-risk behavior because they don't feel as if they're like everyone else. Why are they able to see the angles? Why are they able to see the different routes to things when everyone else seems to want to go in a straight line? Their thoughts are, there's so many other ways to get there. Another assumption is that the social and emotional development of a gifted student is on par with their intellectual ability. That's not true. Just because a gifted student has a high IQ does not mean that they are socially and emotionally developed according to their age. Some of them, although not socially inept, still struggle with the thoughts of not feeling like they belong, feeling like they are out of the norm and that something must be wrong with them. Some people think gifted students are excellent peer mentors to other students. That's the whole process of learning by osmosis. That just because that they can explain things to and put things down on paper and score well on tests and that they think out of the box, they also feel like because they can do that, they should be able to tutor another child. And that's not the case. They feel like gifted students can accomplish anything they put their minds to. Well, yeah, anybody can accomplish anything they put their minds to, but just because they're gifted doesn't mean that they can do it any better. The future of the gifted student is assured. The world of opportunity awaits for them. They have fewer problems with others because of their intelligence and abilities somehow exempt them from the daily hassles of life. They claim that these students that are gifted need no motivation, that they are self-directed and have life figured out. That is a problem that school counselors are going to run into. The fact that they feel that these students don't need any counseling because they may in fact be more intelligent in a particular area is one of the problems that school counselors will have to address. And this is why this population of students are so underserved, because people do not understand them, and there is not enough research abound to show any differently. Most teachers and support personnel that work with gifted students realize that the myths that I outlined in the previous slide are further from the truth than they can imagine. These myths tend to dehumanize the inherent nature of these students and don't look at them as the true individuals that they are. But did you know that gifted students are oftentimes principals and sticklers for getting it right? They display asynchronous development. Their social, emotional, physical, and intellectual age is not congruent with their biological age. They experience guilt over achieving grades that they have deemed too low, or feelings of anguish over their personal achievements. Because of that, that is why you may have the underground student who doesn't want everyone to know how smart they are. The fact that they may not get an A makes them feel that they didn't accomplish anything at all. Did you know that gifted students can be considered a leaper, which is a person who thinks is a spatial leader, or, a spatial learner, or a mapper, someone who is a sequential learner who has to learn in steps? Most people are sequential learners. They have to learn in steps. However, the gifted student can either learn by jumping around in the curriculum or jumping around in a topic and learning different facets at it at different times, or they can thrive and learn in steps like the majority of people and the majority of the way the curriculum is taught. Did you know that gifted students can suffer from low grades due to boredom and lack of interest in the curriculum that they've already mastered? The majority of them already come into the classroom knowing the material before they even entered into school. So to sit down and have to listen and be brought into the fold of other students who they've already feel that they may be a little bit more intellectually superior than, can cause them to have low grades because they lack attention to the information and they grow bored. And when they grow bored, they do things to keep themselves occupied, which may not be in the norm of what the teacher wants them to do. Although they do well academically, they often consider themselves failures if they receive anything less than an A. Did you know that gifted students have a difficult time making decisions and need help with test-taking skills? When they are presented with for instance, a multiple choice question test, they have a hard time answering them because they see the endless possibilities and they can see where the other person is coming from. So they have the ability to see beyond the norm. They have the ability to look at an answer and see how the person can draw that conclusion. Although it may not be the right conclusion, they do have the ability to see how it can be placed and where it fits within their construct of thinking. us talk about the historical timeline as it relates to the counseling of the gifted individual. More so as it relates to the ability to recognize that there is a difference in counseling when it comes to the gifted student. Again, Coliangelo and Wood found that there are several key components on the timeline to where we are currently. In 1916, the father of gifted education, Louis Turnman, publishes the Binet-Simon intelligence test. In 1922, in New York City, Lita Hollingsworth's Special Opportunity Class at PS 165 begins. This class would lead to the founding of the future PS 500, the Spire School. Her experiences and research led her to conclude that highly gifted children have intellectual and effective needs that can be met through counseling and emotional education. This is the beginning or the precursor for the social and emotional construct that we have in schools today. In 1934, the Journal of Educational Psychology publishes the educational achievement of the group of gifted Negro children. In 1952, the American Personnel and Guidance Association was erected and became the precursor for what is now known as the American Counseling Association. 1954, the National Association for Gifted Children is founded. But in 1957, the National Defense Education Act provides funding for counselors in school as a result of the Race to Space initiative following the Soviet satellite launch of Sputnik. The United States at that point decided that they were going to invest in gifted students because they did not want to be left behind the Soviet Union as it related to being able to explore space. In 1972, Education of the Gifted and Talented, commonly referred to as the Marlin Report, is the first report published on gifted education and was delivered to the U.S. Congress. The report states that the gifted and talented population constitutes 3% to 5% of the school population, and that this population is not having its educational needs met. This set the stage for the Office of Gifted and Talented, which was erected in 1974, 2 years later. In 1976, the establishment of the American Health Association was put into place. However, in 1981, regrettably, the suicide of a 17-year-old highly gifted student by the name of Dallas Egbert gained national attention. He committed suicide and talked about his pangs of depression and feeling unappreciated and feeling invisible because that he was highly gifted. This is where the term calling a person who is highly intelligent or a nerd an Egbert. This is when the term came about. However, in 1999, $20 million was allocated for schools to hire qualified counselors. It seems now that the United States was earmarking money for social and emotional needs. It's a long cry off. In 2006, The ASCA's Professional School Counselor Journal publishes sections on students with exceptionalities, including students labeled as twice gifted. Again, we talked about being twice gifted, being able to be gifted as well as learning disabled is what they're known as. And in 2014, a special section dedicated to the counseling the gifted is released by the Journal of Counseling and Development. And now in 2018, they now have a journal called the Journal for Counseling Gifted Students. Now that brings us to the profession of school counseling for the gifted student, or the lack thereof. There's a great deal of information that still needs to be brought about. School counselors are still not in a position to where they can recognize a gifted student versus an at-risk student and tell the difference of the two. This is why the slide is called School Counseling for the Gifted Student, or the Lack Thereof. The school counseling profession has not provided a great deal of equity to this population. They still feel marginalized, they still feel unrecognized, and they still feel that they are overlooked and they fall between the cracks. Oftentimes, counselors work with children that are displaying dysfunctional behavior. However, they are unable to get to the crux of the matter to understand that they could, in fact, not just be an at-risk student, but the reason why they're acting out is because they may be gifted. Simple time, simple manpower, and simple responsibilities of duties prevent school counselors from adequately servicing these students. And this is the reason why they feel like they're not provided a great deal of equity within their school. And then they, in fact, become the dropouts. They become the rebel rousers because they feel like their needs are not being met. There is a gap in school counseling preparation programs as it relates to counseling these students. There's not a great deal of information put in counseling programs that deal with the gifted students. At best, textbooks only dedicate singular chapters to this student population, thus regulating them to an underserved group. Counselors' biases hinder the potential therapeutic relationship even before counseling gets underway. That harkens back to those stereotypes and those preconceived notions that I mentioned. Gifted students are not typically viewed as at-risk students because of the stereotypes associated with their giftedness. The ideal is that they're too intelligent to act out. They should know better. Dropout rates, substance abuse, and self-injurious behavior are prevalent among these students, and additional research needs to be done about why these students feel the need to engage in self-injurious activity, or why they're dropping out at alarming rates, and why they feel like they're not being intellectually challenged. High test scores and academic success often give false equivalents to norm-adjusted students. Just because a student scores high on a test and is academically successful does not mean that they are well-adjusted individuals. They still have social and emotional issues that are not being addressed because they are not like everyone else, and they know it. And since they know this, This puts them in a different category than their peers. Oftentimes they can't relate to their peers because they feel like they're not intellectually on par with them. Educating the parental unit, educating the parents. A lot of parents simply can't deal with the fact that their child is gifted. They don't even know how to relate to their own child because the child is so intellectually superior than them. Based on the multicultural perspective and the ethnicity, one ethnic group may look at a child and say that the child is being obnoxious, the child is being rude, the child does not recognize their place in society or in the family structure because they have the ability to have conversations with adults. In layman's terms, gifted children, by some parents who don't recognize them, are looked at as children that don't know how to stay within a child's place, whatever that is. Parents commonly recognize their child's needs for academic challenges and creative opportunities, but seldom know where to source the information to meet these needs. They just have no idea on how to stimulate them. They have no idea on how to keep them learning and growing. So they treat the children like they treat their children like all the same, and the child becomes, at risk because he feels ignored and he feels like he's not being challenged. Counselors can assist with designing workshops to help the parents understand how to recognize giftedness, cope with the traits, and provide appropriate stimuli for their child. Parents are often left feeling overwhelmed and ill-equipped to deal with a gifted child. They just don't know where to start. They actually have children that make them feel unintelligent. And some parents turn this into resentment because they feel like the child is trying to usurp their authority just because they have the intellectual ability to question them. Most parents tend to parent homogeneously and are left feeling intellectually inferior, again, to their own child. So if they have 3 or 4 children, they seem to parent them all the same, not knowing that you have to parent a child based on where they are and meet them where they are. School counselors would become a great resource for both the student and the family if they were well equipped with the information to service this population. There's a great deal of opportunity to learn more about this. Working with gifted children, from the research that I find, I haven't even scratched the surface on how to counsel them. There's so much more happening right now. Now we're on the cusp of this because children are in fact learning more and they're more intellectually astute than ever before. My final slide is best practices to implement in a comprehensive school counseling program. Wood, who wrote in 2010, recognizes that providing counseling in the school setting towards gifted students presents a unique problem for the counselor. General counseling provided to the majority student body will not meet the needs of the gifted population. They're also finding that counseling preparation programs are not adequately preparing students on how to deal with the gifted student. Like I said before, at best, a chapter or two is dedicated to the gifted child, whereas there needs to be a complete discipline on how to deal with children that are in fact gifted or children that in fact have special needs. You can find information on how to counsel a student that has autism. You can find information on how to counsel a student that may engage in self-injurious behavior. But very rarely can you find a great deal of information on how to counsel a student that is considered gifted. Another best practice to implement in a comprehensive school counseling program is differentiating from general school counseling practices, which is imperative to the success of the gifted student. Gifted students present a unique a unique brand of needs for most counselors, and the astute counselor will recognize that. Small group work may work best with this population, and even segregating the groups by gender, ethnicity, and nationality may be better yet. So if you have a group of, let's say, you have a group of female gifted students that happen to all be from a specific nationality, may help them form bonds and relationships with like-minded people. It is of the utmost importance that the school counselors become familiarized with traits, idiosyncrasies, and challenges these students present. Boredom, underachievement, social withdrawal, and at-risk behavior can all be associated with the lack of challenging material. That's not the only thing it can be associated with, but it can be associated with the characteristics of a gifted student. It is prudent that counselors look at the gifted student from a holistic approach and not immediately discount their behavior as an unwillingness to comply to the school rules if in fact they are underachievers and they are displaying at-risk behavior. You have to look at them from a holistic approach. And finally, counselors and teachers should work in tandem to provide the students with basic skill sets to enhance academic achievement and not assume that since the child is gifted, their social and emotional skills are equally as honed as their academic skills. In conclusion, practicing school counseling professionals can readily access essential information to increase their awareness and to increase their ability to recognize characteristics of the gifted child. There are a great deal of seminars that are being erected now. You have books and journal articles written by prominent scholars of the gifted education. Colangelo was one that I mentioned. Peterson is someone who I drew on and gleaned information from, and you'd see that person within my references. You can go to your local district's high ability education office, and also counselors need to be advocates for these students. These students fall under the special education umbrella because they in fact require a special education. However, I feel that it's prudent and imperative that school counselors advocate more for them, and not just on the academic level, but also in social and emotional development. There needs to be more information given to counselors, given to teachers, given to pupil support staff on how to deal with these students and recognize them, and not just have them being labeled as nerds, or being that this child is an at-risk behavior, or this child needs a BIP, a behavioral intervention plan. There needs to be more information on delving into the why they're acting this way. And regrettably, you're not able to do that as a school counselor because you just don't have the hours to do that. It's not a great deal of counseling that goes or therapy that goes into counseling when you get to maybe even the high school level, because everything is so data driven about and helping students get into college and helping them with their transcripts, that most high school counselors don't even have the time to counsel anymore. You have more of an opportunity to do that in the elementary and the middle school level, but it's at the middle school level where these gifted kids may go awry because their peer group is so important to them. They're so concerned with fitting in, and that's where that little middle passage between elementary school and high school, and that middle passage called middle school, is so crucial for the social and emotional development of all students, but more specifically for students that are deemed or recognized as gifted. I hope that my presentation gave you some information about this underserved population of students. If nothing else, I hope that it it encourages you and it piques your interest to go and do a little bit more research about it. Thank you, and good night.